Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Discography Discussion, a show where I take a deep dive into the studio albums of a specific artist, group, or band. And my, has it been a long awaited discography discussion. Sorry for the long hiatus. Hopefully, we're looking at warmer weather. I might be a little under the weather, speaking of, so if my voice sounds a little weird, sorry, I'm just a little bit sick, but don't worry, we'll get over it soon. But as you can see today, we're taking a look at finally Hollywood Undead studio albums. An episode that I promised pretty much half a year ago, a little more now, and a discography that I have listened to now 3 separate times. For the initial video, the remake of the video, and now the re-remake of the video. So here we are. Pretty much all I have to say before we get into it is that Hollywood Undead was I would say band, but more so a group, saying as they each kind of don't really do their own instrumentals, even though sometimes they do, but everyone also has a chance to sing. They were formed in LA in 2005, originally known as The Kids. They started out on MySpace, as a lot of bands did back in the day like that. Now, I would normally list the members here, but I'm actually going to have to do that differently this time. Hollywood Undead is much like the Misfits, wherein they kind of changed members a lot, or maybe not a lot, but they changed members from album to album, and so I'll just go into the members with the specific album. So don't worry, we'll get there when we get there. Uh, Originally, their first album had a little bit of problem releasing because they wanted to find a specific record label that wouldn't censor too much of the album. So it took a little while, about 2 years, until they found someone finally, and then another year to finally get it mixed properly, and then they finally released it in 2008. And before we get on, they did a small tour before releasing that album with Skrillex known as Sonny and the Bloody Monkeys. In total, they have 5 studio albums, 4 EPs. A large mix of their songs are just either very serious and heavy in tone, or what they like to call party tracks, which is just them kind of going a little crazy, talking about partying and having fun and getting drunk and being crazy and goofy whenever they want. So, without further ado, let's get into the first album. And the first album we're going to be looking at today is Swan Songs, which was released in 2008 with only a total of 14 tracks. Originally, the album's band members were Shady Jeff, J Dog, Deuce, Johnny Three Tears, Charlie Scene, Funny Man, and The Curls. Shortly before they even really released the album, somehow Shady Jeff left, so we don't really know too much about him, aside from he had a little bit to do with the original album and some of the original releases of the songs on MySpace, but nothing to do with the actual studio album that was released everywhere. Uh, Personally, I used to love this album back in the day. In fact, I've been following Hollywood Undead for a little while. Not necessarily the longest of time, but not the shortest of time either, now that I think about it. And this used to be my favorite album out of all of them. Specifically because I actually really like Deuce's vocals. Deuce is usually known as the lead singer on this album, while everyone else comes in and jumps in on a verse or something. Deuce is typically the one who sings out the chorus, and he's the one that you hear the most. And yeah, I don't know. I like this album a lot, but now that I hear it, it hasn't necessarily aged that well. I'm not necessarily saying anything bad either. I'm not saying that it's like a horrible album. It's ugh, but you can tell some of the lyrics aren't all that great because just some of the things they say about each other and to random people that are listening are just and it's just funny to think about how much I really like this album. But that's kind of more speaking about the party tracks, if you will. We'll continue to call them party tracks because that's what they like to call them. For me, the songs that make it a little better on this album are the more serious in tone tracks, like Undead, which is their album opener, and City, as opposed to songs like Everywhere I Go and Number 5. They're not necessarily all that great anymore, but um, I think definitely early on, the thing that I noticed about Hollywood Undead was, at least when I listened to the discography one after the other, and not just sporadically when the albums would release like I was, is that gradually over time you start to realize their albums get better when they focus more on the serious stuff and they do less of the party tracks. And I know that sounds kind of like lame, like, "Oh, you're an old fart. You should like the party tracks too." Well, I do like the party tracks to an extent, and I think they're fine. I think it's fine that they continue to do them. It's classic Hollywood Undead. It's just that when it comes down to it, really, their songs that are a little more serious are definitely the better songs, the ones that excel and the ones that people remember. So, you know, whatever. Anyway, on to the next album. And our next album is American Tragedy, released in 2011. That's quite a few years later, if you look. Um, and now our members are no longer the same. So now it is just J Dog, Johnny Three Tears, Charlie Scene, Funny Man, De Curls, and our new lead singer, Danny. Um, for a while they were doing their tours for Swan Songs and other various tours that followed along with it, just, performing at specific venues and such, as a lot of bands do. Deuce kind of started to drop out and not perform or refuse to perform because he wanted an assistant and just a lot of different things that, to be honest, I don't know if they're 100% true, but I don't really see them being too crazy to not call them as true. So they had a longtime friend whose name was Danny. I know he has a real name, but for the sake of whatever, I'm going to keep their real names out of it. You can look those up, obviously, on like their wiki websites or even just on Google, but for the sake of this, I'm just going to keep it as their names they use for their band and for Hollywood Undead. So I'm not really going to say real names, but his name that he called himself was Danny. He was I would say, what would you call it? Like, in a play when an actor is not there, they have a stand-in, I guess. I guess is what they call him. And Danny was the stand-in for Deuce, and he was a really good lead singer for the concerts that he had to perform. Eventually, they just straight up kicked Deuce out because they were like, "We don't need you anymore. We don't need your problems anymore." So here we go. So now our lead singer is Danny, and again, everyone else is just doing particularly the same thing of, De Curls is on drums, and I think it's J Dog and Charlie Scene do guitar and bass, and each of the members does their own specific instruments, but at the same time they throw in their own vocals and such. I like American Tragedy. I would say it's probably like it's the perfect mix between Swan Songs and what comes later, we'll say. Just hold on that. In that, a lot of the style still feels very much Hollywood Undead, but the sound is very different. A lot more emphasis on instrumentals, like I said, guitar, bass, and drums, as opposed to where Swan Songs, yes, it had guitar, bass, and drums, but it would also focus on beats created in a studio, sort of similar to what would have been famous in like the rap scene in 2008. But now in 2011, we're focusing more on the instrumental and kind of straying away from it being rap rock and more like rock rap. Uh, I would say a lot of people don't particularly like this album because it kind of goes in the direction of almost what I would call an emo band. And honestly, that's kind of what I like about this album. It's kind of like a guilty pleasure because I'm not necessarily particularly fond of a lot of emo bands or ones that would be labeled as emo bands. But Danny just has a really nice sound to his voice, and again, it just sounds nice. So in total, there are 14 tracks in the normal edition, 18 tracks on the deluxe edition, and one extra bonus track that you could download from iTunes, that was Street Dreams, which I also listened to here, which actually happened to be one of my favorites. It's one of the ones that I didn't really get to listen to originally when this album came out, but when it did come out, I was like, wow. Or when I found it later on. I was like, wow, okay, that's a pretty good song. A lot of good songs on here. A lot less of the party tracks, but some of them are on here. They're okay. I don't particularly hate them. I think they're better than the party tracks that are on Swan Songs, in that they've aged a lot better with their lyrics. But it kind of follow a lot of the same themes, and sort of a lot of the songs in general, the serious songs and the party tracks, are going to start following the same theme, and that's California, which is their city, a bottle and a gun, either it being in the name or being referenced a bunch of times throughout, and just straight up wanting to do things to women, such as your mother, or possibly a hotter women at a party. Sorry, I'm sounding like such a prude. I think it's just funny to sound like that. But American Tragedy, pretty good album, pretty good name, pretty good album art, I won't lie. The Swan Songs album was, their art was okay. It looked alright, but this one's a little bit better. It just, it's posed a little bit better, and their faces are there, and yeah, alright. Let's just move on to the next album. Alright, our next album, Notes from the Underground, released in 2013, and easily my favorite album, without a doubt. In total, there are 11 tracks on the normal edition, 14 tracks on the unabridged edition, which could also just be known as the deluxe, and another extra iTunes bonus track called I Am. This album was officially announced at the end of the concert tour for American Tragedy as being pretty much already written out in some ways. They just needed to record and mix and then release. And it was meant to sound a lot similar to Swan Songs, but with a mix of American Tragedy. Charlie Sheen actually takes a lot more of the lead vocals here on the album, as opposed to just Danny, who would normally do the lead vocals, the chorus, and then everyone else jumping in on a verse here and there. But what this album did for Hollywood Undead was open up the idea that pretty much all the members could just sing, either the lead vocals and slash chorus, or in general just lead the song however which way they wanted to. And that was kind of the cool thing about this album, which is probably what makes it my favorite, was from here on out, you can definitely tell that they were thinking more towards the future and thinking more towards releasing more albums that sounded very similar. And I actually really like that. And again, as you can tell, this is easily my favorite album, which is funny because, as kind of I stated, but now I can go into a little more detail earlier, I would have said Swan Songs was my favorite album easily. But now, having listened to Notes from the Underground fully 3 times, it's easily my favorite album. Not only are the songs just really good, and I definitely get where Charlie Sheen is coming from, and saying that it's definitely a mix between Swan Songs and American Tragedy, which it kind of is, but it's also got a little bit of its own new sound here and there that just sounds fantastic. I really like it. A lot of songs, including the iTunes bonus track I Am, which I suggest you definitely listen to, they just come off as this brand new thing, and this like new Hollywood Undead, but still feels the same. Like you're not being alienated for remembering who they were. So, such as if you were a new listener, or if you were just an old-time listener who's been a fan since forever, or even for a little while, you would automatically know who they were and love it. And yeah, I mean, there's not much else I can say about this album other than I love it, I love it, I love it. It's my favorite album. So, yeah. And alright, I'm not gonna lie, this album art's not that great. It's a little boring. But I get what they're going for, that it's supposed to look like an old beaten up notebook, and it's just got the words on it. But, it could have done a little more. Maybe like a weird embossed stamping on the book of all their masks, because that's kind of the thing that I like about most of these albums, is that they show off their masks, which also change with them. I suggest you look up a picture or something. Or, there's usually these huge charts of what all their masks look like, depending on the album or the year. So, yeah. But, that's really the only thing I can say I don't like about this album. And again, the party tracks they're okay. I don't really care for them. I never really did care for them to begin with. So, whatever. Next album. Alright, our next album, Day of the Dead, released in 2015, a total of 12 tracks on the normal edition, 15 tracks on the deluxe edition, a bonus iTunes track, which is Ghost, and two more bonus tracks from Best Buy, known as Sing and F the World. And yes, I do like F the World, but not for its initial reasons, for deeper reasons. Don't worry. Before we get into the album, of course, there's a little bit that I want to talk about and just the history of this album, or just a little bit to know about it. If you got to see them on tour for their previous tour, while this album was being announced, you actually got an early digital download code if you bought tickets, and you could listen to it months before even initial releases came out for everyone. So that's actually kind of a cool thing that they did that I didn't even know about until I started doing a little bit of research. And I like this album, but I don't really care for this album at the same time. There are a lot of songs in this album that I like, but there are a lot of songs in this album that I don't care for. After a while, it starts to get like a little too much of Johnny Three Tears singing from the heart about how depressed he is and about how much he wants to just drink all the way to the end of the bottle. And it's again one of those things where I say that it's a recurring theme because you can just keep hearing it over and over again, but gradually over time it's not going to mean the same thing that you want it to mean, and that's kind of what I don't really like about this album. Is Notes from the Underground kind of doesn't do it as much. It starts to stray away from that and go into other territories here and there with each and every different member of the band, whereas this one, while it still has them, each having their own moment, it starts to feel a little too much like the same again. Almost like we backtracked one. We took maybe 3 steps forward, but we backtracked like another. And we're not necessarily at the beginning, because we have progressed. They've grown, you can definitely tell, but as far as the lyrics, you can kind of just go, what happened, guys? Some of the more creative songs, like the title song, which is Day of the Dead, is really creative, both in just lyrics and in instrumentals. There's a part in the middle of the song where a solo comes out from a Spanish guitar, which makes sense for the holiday Day of the Dead, which is really nice. And but otherwise, man, I have no idea. Some things on this album just were not right. I'm not saying it's even like the worst album. To be honest, I don't really think there is a such thing as a worst album on here with Hollywood Undead. I could think of one, but I wouldn't say that their albums are like from amazing to abysmal. It's just gradual changes that don't make them too great. And this one is kind of one of those gradual degrades that just isn't. It doesn't help. But I'd like to pose a question before we, continue. So, one of the band members is The Curls, and he rarely ever sings. In fact, I'd argue he only sings maybe like out of maybe like 4 or 5 songs does he sing ever. And in those songs, he's usually screaming lyrics in the background, but that's about it. He never has a full-on verse because he doesn't. I don't think he likes to sing. I don't think he ever did. So his only sole purpose in the band is that he is drums and percussion, and he's seen playing drums constantly, and that kind of that's awesome. That brings a lot of realism to it. As I've said before in my Chemical Brothers discography discussion and a couple of others, bringing percussion to it, even if it's not your own or even if it's a sample, regardless, real percussion to something with a lot of synthetic sounds, whether it be faker instruments or just dubstep sounding songs, which there are a couple on this album that aren't too great, or whether they're even just songs that aren't particularly focused on the instrumentals and more so more focus on the vocals and less on the instrumentals. Even adding just that real bit of percussion and drums into it can add a lot, and it can add a lot of rawness and feeling into your song that a lot of created instruments can't bring. So now the problem with this album is it feels like Hollywood Undead is moving more towards like dubstep, if you will, or even just house and trap music. And while that might be great to new listeners, it doesn't sound that great when a whole song is dedicated to it. And it doesn't sound that great when it's used instead of the instrumentals that they know they can make and they have made in the past and done very well. So, the question I'd like to ask is why have a band member whose really only sole purpose is drums and percussion, which would be a vital asset to bring, why have him there? I don't know if you can tell, but the Curls is my favorite band member, and it kind of feels like they gypped him towards the end. I'm not saying they even did anything particularly bad, but why is he still there? It kind of feels like you're pushing him out on purpose. Alright, our last and final album, and it is just called Five. It was released in 2017 with only a total of 14 tracks, just like the original Swan Songs. No deluxe editions, no iTunes bonus track, no Best Buy bonus track, just the 14 tracks in total. And as you can tell, the reason I was talking about that whole DeCurl situation is because he left early on before the album really got started making. So as far as I can tell, he has no real inclusion on this album, sadly. And yeah, so DeCurls is gone. Goodbye, my favorite band member of them all. But whatever, at least they didn't leave on bad terms like they did with Deuce. So whatever. So the album was originally named Five, and this is pretty much a quote coming from Johnny Three Tears. Due to them being five brothers, except they kind of forgot about the sixth, but whatever, and it being their fifth studio album. He even goes on to say that nothing gets to the essence of the music like this number does. And to be completely honest with you, I have no idea what that means. If he means like fifth studio albums tend to be the best, then okay, maybe I could see that. If a band or if a artist group or band happens to get to five, yeah, sure, I could see how five could be a great point for them. But I don't really know what he means by that in general. All the band members agreed for it to be named Five, so that's why it just happened to be named Five. However, this is one of those situations where it has a V on the cover, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense whether it's V or Five. Because, it's just like, well, is it V? Is it 5? Is it the Roman numeral? Is it not? I mean, anyway. Very, very, very clear as to why DeCurl is left. Everything on this album is just trap beats and house beats, dubstep beats, and studio beats. Beats, beats, beats. And that's kind of why I don't think this is their best album. If I had to pick a quote-unquote worst, it would be this. But again, I wouldn't call it worst because I don't necessarily even think it's all that bad, even at its lowest state. It's just not that great. You can tell something changed in their approach to what they were doing. And granted, there's a lot of songs in here that I still like. But when it comes down to the instrumentals of each of the songs, it just does not sound all that good. Especially when you look at it from a perspective of even at their worst, necessarily, even where I would say Day of the Dead particularly doesn't excel, even that still has a lot more real instrumentals in it. And I'm not trying to sound like some sort of like real instruments are better. I'm not trying to go in the prude with that way. But just sometimes it sounds a lot better than if it's not there at all. And here's one of those instances where it definitely needs to be there because so much of this album doesn't sound right with their vocals mixing with these really just almost generic sounding beats from some producer who's like, okay, we're gonna take it to the trap direction. We're gonna take it to the what the new rap is all about and the new hip hop that's all out there. We're gonna take it in that direction, and it just does not sound right. And you can definitely tell that a couple of these songs were meant for new listeners and for radio hits. So, like, we're gonna get this song on the radio and it's gonna be on there. So, guys, let's try to tone down the lyrics. But then later on, then you have another song that goes into Johnny Three Tears and the bottom of the bottle, and I point the gun in my head, and I hate everything in the world right now. Why does everybody suck? And it's just again and again and again and again. But where this album excels. I'll say that much. It's not particularly the greatest. Obviously, I would count this as probably, if from 1 to 5, 1 being the top, 1 is definitely Notes from the Underground, and 5 is number 5, or number 5 is 5. Huh. Guess it doesn't matter each way, but regardless, you can definitely tell that this album just, when it has its Hollywood Undead feel to it, it has it right. When it has those songs done and you can hear them each singing and their, the instrumentals and their sound right, or even if it's the studio beats that are created for the song, when they sound right, They hit the spot. They sound like Hollywood Undead. But when they start to stray far too much from that, it starts to feel weird. And I'm not necessarily saying that they can't grow into that, just they have to grow gradually. Not so sudden and just like, oh, here it is. But, whatever. Maybe someone else really, really likes this album in ways that I can't see or that I just don't. And, hey, that's fine. Power to you. If you really like this album, that's great. There's a couple of songs I could probably agree with you on. But otherwise, yeah, not so great. So let's just move on to the final thoughts, and let's just wrap this sucker up and get her over with. So, in general, I think Hollywood Undead's fine. Despite me kind of ragging on that last album, I think they're fine. They've shown themselves to be predominant in everything that they do. They continue to grow and change. Even if they lose members, they continue to strive on and move forward. However, that leaves me with one single thing to say. They cannot lose another member right now, because I don't see it going in the direction that they might think it will go in the past. When Deuce left, they had someone who clearly could follow in their lead, and who could be the replacement for Deuce, but also be something different. Someone who wasn't going to necessarily sound the same, or even act the same, who's going to be just a better person overall. And that's the only reason why I think Danny even worked as a replacement. DeCurl's leaving, while not necessarily the most pleasant thing, and I'm not saying that he left on good terms, I should say that he left still as friends with the rest of the members, but him leaving, while not necessarily the best thing meaning for their instrumentals, I still think they can somehow move on. Just they have to do it gradually. However, I think if any other member of this band leaves anymore, they're done with. And the reason I say this is J-Dog, Johnny Three Tears, Charlie C, and Danny, and Funnyman. Each one of them has had major vocal contributances, I guess would be the word, to each of these albums. Every single one from the beginning to now. And even in their EPs. And I think losing another band member is going to really change the dynamic of Hollywood Undead, and it will not be good. So I don't see them, getting rid of any band members anytime soon anyway, but just saying that I hope that they just don't. But as a group slash band, I think they're going to be fine. They're going to continue to grow in places they need to grow. I just think they need to handle it with a little more caution than they've been doing in the past. I think that yes, they could move towards whatever direction they wanted to, but I think they need to do it gradually and ease even the newcomers into it, because even I think new listeners kind of thought Five sounded like a weird album, but we're pretty okay with it. But they just they need to move slowly, if you will, or at least, like I said, gradually. I'll keep saying that word over and over again, but whatever, gradually. As far as the other members who have left, which are Deuce and DeCurls, each of them has said that they wanted to start their own solo career, and actually Deuce has. Up until now, he's still doing his own studio albums and LPs and EPs and stuff that he's still releasing as his own. He had a little bit of controversy, of course, when he first left with the band, constantly calling them out and releasing diss tracks and different things like that. But as far as I can tell, that stuff isn't really gone on too much. Maybe once again, something came up, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't seem like too much beef is between them anymore. Gladly. As far as the Curls, pretty much as soon as he left, he announced that he was going to start his own solo career, but so far nothing has come from it, sadly. But he does say every once in a while on his Twitter that he is doing something, that he plans to release something when the time is right, and pretty much the generic stuff that you hear. But, hey, I hope he does release something, because I'd love to hear it. But as far as rest of Hollywood Undead, I think they'll be fine. I think people will continue to criticize their albums for whatever reason. I think critics will continue to say, this band doesn't know how to grow. But that's just definitely not true, because as you can hear with all 5 of these albums, they have changed gradually, both in sound and in lyrics. And sometimes drastically they've changed. And, it's all for the better. I don't really think that they deserve a lot of the criticism that they get, that a lot of people think they get, which is, just calling them some of the worst stuff ever. But honestly, they don't do any real harm. I've been listening to them for such a long time that I have not changed in any crazy way, and whatever. But yeah, I guess that does it for Hollywood Undead. This is a particularly long episode, I know. I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess that's it. I think we're done here. So, I just want to say thank you for watching. And yes, discography discussion is back. It should, be the next Saturday or Sunday, the next Sunday that it'll be another episode. As for what that is, I don't know, because I'd like to hear what you would like me to hear. So in the comments down below, if there's any particular artist, group, or band that you'd like me to listen to, go ahead and list it down, and I will definitely take that suggestions in, because I could definitely use some suggestions. Well, I have a lot of bands and other things, rolling around in my head of things that I can make discography discussions about. I sure would love to hear what your suggestions are, because those are always good inputs. If you guys want to leave a like on the video, leave it. If you dislike the video, go ahead and give me that thumbs down, because I'm totally okay with that. If you have any criticism as to what I could be doing with the show better, go ahead and also leave those down in the comments. I have a Twitter account, which will be in the description down below, and from there you can just see updates and such of the show, new releases, if an episode's going to be particularly late or early, if that ever happens. And when my next hiatus will be, because I'm going to have to take another hiatus eventually. But for now, let's just enjoy where we are. So, thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day, and bye-bye.